The formalized method is a way in which I can be transformed, produced into a formalized researcher. For this to happen, so many decisions have to have already happened prior to my participation. So people who have written the textbooks, people who have formalized, systematized methods of research, they have made those decisions for me. They have made decisions, including ontological decisions, what it is that I'm going to do research about. Folk phenomenology is a way of reversing the order between the researcher and the methods, between the researcher and the theories about the method. Hello, this video is going to be a review of the book Folk Phenomenology by Samuel D. Rocha. The full title of the book is Folk Phenomenology, Education, Study, and the Human Person. This beautiful title also offers a good description of its potential readership. So people who are in philosophy or interested in philosophy, phenomenology, education, or even psychology, or generally humanities, and art, are people who are in art with some philosophical orientation, I think would find this book useful. Sam's writing is friendly for beginning readers, and something else about Sam's style of writing is that he is able to make every topic interesting. So for me personally, I wouldn't really care what from now on he's going to write about or talk about. I would read or listen to what he has to say because of his style. He's able to bring out what is interesting or what is mysterious in addressing any topic. Why is that? Why are some people able to make every topic interesting regardless of what they are addressing? They bring the topic to life. I think the general answer to that question is that writers or artists who have that characteristic, they have a world or a vision. And Sam Rocha also, in that sense, he has a world, he has a vision. And when I say a vision, I don't mean that he has a certainty or certain knowledge and information that he just feels driven to share with his readers. Part of having a vision is having a style of seeking, sensing, and seeing. And these three words that I just used, they're keywords in folk phenomenology in his book. I'm borrowing his own words. So having a vision is having a way of seeking, sensing, and seeing. And that, to me, that's what it means in part to have a world as an artist or a writer. So this book, Folk Phenomenology, is an expression of that vision, that style of seeking, sensing, and seeing. It is a style that is showing its self-awareness and its self-justification. And as I said already, specifically, this style is being applied to the theme of education in such a way that shows the connection between education and these other themes, topics, study and the human person. So there's a quote from the book that talks about its aim, its scope. We read that this book is perhaps best understood as a meditation on teaching in an age when the teacher has again become an outcast. End quote. So the book can be understood as a treatment, a meditation on teaching. And there are useful contrasts in folk phenomenology with other approaches. And these other approaches that Sam is distancing himself from are ideological approaches to education. So ideological as a general umbrella term. Ideology is cold, it is unimaginative. And instead of keeping questions alive, it deals with settled matters. The teacher becomes, in this scenario, when the matters are settled, questions are no longer alive, we don't imagine anything, and we are operating based on an ideology. In this approach, the teacher, of course, becomes a tool, if not an outcast. Sam contrasts his approach with these ideological approaches, and they include a political reduction of education and psychological or psychometric reduction of education. So what do these approaches say? A political reduction of education or a psychological psychometric reduction of education. What do they say? They say things like this, that we know enough about education already. So instead, let's just implement and enforce policies. Or, as the psychological approach would say, psychologistic, that psychologizes education. They might say, we know enough about education. We know what is important already. So let's just implement psychometric, the right kinds of exams, standardized methods of assessment to keep track of how this way of education that we have already discovered, we've already settled on, how well it is working. Let's just come up with those methods of assessment. These approaches neglect education. They neglect what education is, what study is, what it means to study. And they also neglect the human person, what it means to study, to go through education as a human person. So Sam wants to distance himself from these approaches, from settled matters, and go to the heart of the matter. That's the spirit of his ontological turn, a turn away from epistemology and semantics to ontology, to what exists, to what is real. Saying that it is not a matter of talking differently, using different modes of knowing the same thing, different epistemology, changing just our epistemology, but instead considering the possibility that we are dealing with something else, or what we are dealing with has hidden parts that are so significant that might drive us, might motivate us to acting differently. So let me pause here and get away momentarily from talking about education, and let me say a few things about folk phenomenology, the concept folk phenomenology, using the analogy of folk music. What is folk music and what is the opposite of folk music? When something is not folk music, what is it? Or folk art? I think it is fair to say that the opposite of folk music is systematic music, or systematized or formalized music. Formalized music is music that is based on already identified and settled schemas, including scales and rhythms, types of rhythms and categories of scales. There are already, in that sense, there are already, before we write new music, before we play music, and before we talk about a piece of music, there are already formalized and systematized criteria and categories for evaluating music. This makes music neat, it makes music orderly and well organized, but it also cuts it off from its origin. Folk music, by contrast, is connected to a form of life. It's connected to other activities that the people who are engaged in folk music also engaged with. Folk music is connected to, and it's grounded in occasions in a form of life, moods, personalities, roles in a community, maybe seasons even, types of weather. It's not orderly and neat. So in folk music, we have, for example, these incomplete or so-called limping rhythms that are not as neat and orderly as systematized and formalized music. And folk music, moreover, it cannot be cut off from its origin, from where it is taking its life from. Folk music belongs to someone. It belongs to a folk. There is mutual belonging between folk and its music, a folk and its music. Formalized music can travel, and it plays a different role compared to folk music for people who engage with it, learn it, and play it, participate in it. Systematized and formalized music can be a hobby, can be a pastime, detached from the other activities that a person does. But I don't mean that it can only be a non-serious activity. Systematized and formalized music can also be a profession. Somebody can be a professional musician. That's also a possible relationship with formalized or systematized music. Formalized music doesn't take into account that we are bound to so many other things, that we are bound to a family, to geography, to rituals, to different moods, different weather. But folk music is connected to all of that. Now, let's depart from music and think about textbooks and how textbooks formalize and systematize study and research methods. Think about textbooks on qualitative research methods in social sciences or qualitative phenomenological research methods in education. A formalized or systematized phenomenological method, can be used by me, by anybody, regardless of whatever else I do in the rest of my life. The formalized method is a way in which I can be transformed, produced into a formalized researcher. For this to happen, so many decisions have to have already happened prior to my participations. So people who have written the textbooks, people who have formalized, systematized methods of research, they have made those decisions for me. They have made decisions, including ontological decisions, what it is that I'm going to do research about. Folk phenomenology is a way of reversing the order between the researcher and the methods, between the researcher and the theories about the method. It reverses the order. The person who is doing the research, the person who is interested in the subject matter, comes first before possible formalization or systematization. Folk phenomenology, by doing this reversal, begins with a concern with what is real, with what exists. It begins, for example, in this case, with asking, what is education? So this is an interruption. When somebody is operating based on those textbooks, based on those formal methods, for them, this is introduced as a kind of interruption for people who just want to take a method and produce qualitative research on education, do a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation. It seems like an interruption of that style of work. But this interruption is a philosophical interruption. It is a philosophical interruption that is more concerned with the object of study. So even though it might seem like an interruption or an interference, it is actually an interference that tries to be even more faithful to what is already happening, to whatever formalized research method or research activity that is going on. This folk phenomenological interruption comes in and wants to make it more true to what it aims to its aim, what it tries to be. It doesn't invite you to do something else, but to do the same thing more appropriately, I think. Folk phenomenology is concerned with what is real, not primarily with formalized methods. But that also isn't a cold concern. It is a passionate and, in Sam's words, erotic concern. It is grounded in our desire to be within the right world, to belong to the right place, to go on, survive, and to exist in the right way. He turns to each of these three sides of the topic, education, study, and the human person, and brings out the mystery. So, for example, in discussing the topic of study, he talks about all the ways in which studying, the apparently simple activity of studying, is out of our control. So you go and study something, maybe before an exam, or doing some research, some literature review, and there are all these parts of the activity that are out of our control and might change in ways that are unpredictable, difficult to predict. So we might, for example, start studying and gain a new interest that we didn't foresee before, or lose interest in an unpredictable way, suddenly realizing that I'm not interested in this anymore, like for my own experience of doing experimental psychology. In a way that at first was difficult to explain, I just lost interest in that method of studying the human mind. And later on, I realized why. And study also is about learning what it is that is the reason of studying. So part of the activity of studying is figuring out, why am I studying? And the hope that is associated with that attitude. So the Trinitarian lens. Let me say a few words about this Trinitarian lens, the three-part lens. You can see this lens as an anti-reductionistic reduction, an anti-schematic schema. Might seem paradoxical, but I think it is fair to describe it in that way. It is a reduction, but is a reduction that is resisting other formalist forms of reduction. Given that it has three targets that simultaneously concerned with its three targets, it is meant to work against neglecting crucial distinctions between being, existence, and subsistence. This three-part distinction reminds me a lot of the philosophy of Charles Sanders Peirce, the the metaphysics that he introduced between firstness, secondness, and thirdness. But that's something that we don't need to get into here. I would just say that if you, I think it deserves some effort for people who are interested in Peirce's philosophy and Sam's work. There is something to be done here to draw some similarities, some maybe useful synthesis. Let me talk about just what this three-part distinction made me think about. The distinction between being, subsistence, and existence. I won't talk too much about it because I would like you to go and read the book and figure out what this Trinitarian lens means for yourself. I'll just talk about a movie that I watched when I was 7 years old. So it was a movie that I watched, one of the first movies I watched in the movie theater with my father. We went there together, and this was a very memorable and formative movie for me, very formative experience for me. The movie's title is Hamun. Hamun is the name of the guy, the main character in the story. And I talk about the narrative now as I remember it. The most memorable narrative thread in the story is about a man who, from the beginning to the end of the movie, he's coming to terms with the fact that his wife doesn't love him anymore and wants to get a divorce. And at first he's denying that, he's struggling against it, he's trying to change her mind. And at the same time, he has these flashbacks, remembering early days of meeting his wife, being together, falling in love. But slowly throughout the movie, as we learn more about him, and he learns more about his situation, he comes to accept that he is not with his wife anymore. They're not together anymore. She doesn't want him anymore. And he lives within a world where the two of them are not together. And at the end of the movie, he commits suicide. So this movie, the whole story flashed before me in my memory when I read about this Trinitarian lens. The body of this guy, Hamun, and his existence, his body, that's one, corresponds to one part of this Trinitarian lens. The love and relationship that was lost, the subsistence that was no longer there, and the being. It is not just about a person and the relationship, the loving relationship or the lost relationship, but it is also about the kind of world. There is a world in which their relationship could survive, and there's a different world, conceptually at least, in which their relationship could not survive, and he didn't want to exist as a body, as a living body in that second world. So folk phenomenology is not only a method of thinking about and investigating education, study, and the human person. It is a philosophy. It is a philosophical approach to life, to the realities of life. Let me include a quote from William James that is included in the book. William James writes, "Philosophy, in order not to lose human respect, might take some notice of the actual constitutions of reality." So this book is doing exactly this. He is trying to notice and be faithful to the actual constitutions of reality. So I would recommend wholeheartedly this book for students who are interested in these themes. And I would like to hear from you after you read the book, what you think about it. That's it for now. Thank you for your attention, and I will speak with you in the next video.